He produced a gun, handgun, and fired multiple shots, killing his ex-wife.
She begged for protection. She filed restraining orders. She even wrote, "I am asking for help before it's too late." Weeks later, her words became a chilling prophecy. Latricia Green Brown was a 40-year-old mother and hospital worker in Detroit. She spent her days caring for others, helping patients heal, and comforting her colleagues during long, exhausting shifts. But while she was offering compassion inside the hospital walls, fear followed her home. A man she once trusted, her ex-husband, was slowly closing in. And despite her repeated cries for help, the system left her exposed. Have you ever asked for help only to feel invisible? Have you ever wondered what it's like to plead for safety, yet be met with silence? That's the position Latricia found herself in, cornered by fear, yet ignored by the very system designed to protect her. She wasn't just another statistic. She was a mother, a cousin, a trusted coworker. She lived a life of service inside a hospital where patients expected safety and care. Yet the place she called her second home would become the very site of her final moments. A cruel irony that shocked an entire city. On a late August morning in 2025, her ex-husband entered the basement of Henry Ford Hospital. Minutes later, gunfire echoed through the hallways. The woman who had warned of her own death was silenced forever. This case forces us to ask hard questions. How could a mother be killed inside her workplace despite her desperate pleas for protection? Why was a court order reduced to a meaningless piece of paper? And how many others are left vulnerable, waiting for action that comes too late? Before we continue, share your thoughts in the comments. Should courts be held accountable for failing to enforce protection orders? Before the headlines, before the tragedy, there was simply Latricia. To her family and colleagues, she was a quiet source of strength, always present, always dependable. At 40 years old, she had spent more than 2 decades working at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. Those who knew her described her as the heartbeat of the workplace.
It was the most horrible feeling because when you're in a room and they tell you can't leave and it's somebody shooting, you just don't know. And your life just starts flashing, in front of your
Needed
eyes.
Comfort. Her colleagues remembered her not just as a professional, but as a presence that lifted the room. One described her as magnificent. More than a friend, she was a mother, she was a wife, she did her job. Another called her an angel, recalling how she would stay behind after a shift to check on patients or lend an ear to a nurse struggling through exhaustion. For Latricia, care was not just her occupation, it was who she was at her core. She carried her compassion beyond hospital walls into the lives of those closest to her. Family members echoed the same sentiment. Her cousin described her as such a sweet person. She didn't deserve what happened to her at all. Behind those words lay decades of memories, birthdays, laughter, and everyday gestures of love that built the bonds of family. Even after losing her father, a loss that could have broken her spirit, Latricia chose perseverance. She returned to work, focused on providing stability for her children, and showed resilience that inspired those around her. She wasn't only surviving, she was creating a life of purpose despite the challenges she faced. To know Latricia is to recognize that she was never defined by fear, but by kindness. She lived for others, her children, her patients, her coworkers, and her family. She was someone people leaned on without hesitation. In the words of those mourning her, she was more than a statistic. She was a mother, a friend, an angel. When her story is told, it must begin here, with the life she built, the love she gave, and the quiet strength that defined her. Only by remembering who she truly was can we understand the depth of what was lost. After Latricia's divorce from Mario in 2018, one might have expected a fresh start, a chance for peace. Instead, the end of the marriage marked the beginning of relentless torment. Mario could not accept separation. What followed was a campaign of harassment that blurred the line between persistence and outright danger. Friends say he lingered around places she worked, placed calls that went unanswered, and made his presence known in ways that unsettled her spirit. The safety Latricia tried to build after leaving him was under constant threat, and each passing week seemed to bring a new violation. By June 2025, Latricia had had enough. She went to court to request a personal protection order. In her filing, she detailed threatening phone calls to her job, unwanted attempts to enter her workplace, and stalking behaviors that made her fear for her safety. Yet, despite her testimony, her request was denied. The system turned her away, leaving her without protection. That moment was not just paperwork, it was the sound of a door closing when she needed it most. The denial left her exposed, and Mario's behavior didn't stop, it intensified, as if encouraged by inaction. Weeks later, Mario escalated further. He broke into Latricia's car, damaging her belongings, clothes, shoes, items that carried both value and dignity. He followed her on the road, swerving aggressively to scare her into losing control. He called her workplace dozens of times, harassing her until her days were filled with dread. This was no longer occasional intimidation, it was daily warfare on her peace of mind. Latricia, exhausted and afraid, returned to the courts in July 2025. This time, she hoped the gravity of her situation would be undeniable. Her family understood the reality. Her cousin later said she was a woman crying out for help. Those closest to her watched helplessly as she balanced motherhood, her hospital duties, and the constant stress of a man who refused to let her live in peace. Each day without action was another day that placed Latricia in jeopardy, and while she tried to stay strong, those around her sensed the weight she carried. Fear was no longer occasional, it became a constant companion. The outcome that would later shock Detroit felt inevitable to those who heard her cries. This is where the dread settles in for us as listeners. Latricia's case was not hidden, it was documented, reported, and stamped with court approval. Yet, nothing was enforced. The audience knows what's coming, but the pain is in realizing that Latricia knew, too. She foresaw her own end and tried to stop it, but the system left her unprotected. If you believe stories like Latricia's must be heard and remembered, so no other cry for help is ignored. Subscribe now to True Crime Records. Your support ensures these lessons are never forgotten. August 22nd, 2025 began like any other morning at Henry Ford Hospital. Staff arrived for their shifts, patients waited for care, and Latricia prepared for another day in the basement workspace she had known for years. To her, it was routine, a chance to focus on her duties, support her team, and provide for her family. But outside those walls, danger was already moving. Her ex-husband, Mario Green, had made his way to the hospital. To those inside, it was just another Friday. To Latricia, though she didn't know it, it would be her final day alive. Around mid-morning, Mario entered the hospital carrying the calm of a man with a purpose. He wasn't there for treatment or to visit a patient. Witnesses recall him heading directly into the basement, claiming he was there to drop off belongings. Security saw no immediate reason to stop him. He walked with familiarity as if he belonged. In truth, he was closing in on the woman who had begged for protection. Latricia, focused on her tasks, suddenly found herself face-to-face with the man she feared most. What should have been a routine morning turned into a nightmare. A heated exchange began. Witnesses recall raised voices, a demand for him to leave. Those who overheard said the argument was brief but intense. Latricia stood in the place she had worked for decades, confronted by a man she had tried to legally bar from her life. Then, in seconds, the confrontation escalated beyond words. Mario pulled out a handgun. The sound of gunfire shattered the calm of the basement, echoing through hallways where patients and staff had moments earlier gone about their day. Latricia was struck at close range. The woman who gave so much was gone instantly. The hospital erupted in chaos. Staff screamed, running for safety. Patients, already vulnerable, were rushed into locked rooms. Alarms sounded as emergency protocols activated. Within minutes, the building was placed on lockdown. Heavily armed police units, SWAT, and federal agents swarmed the facility, searching for any sign of continued threat. Inside, the air was heavy with shock. A place meant to heal had become a crime scene. Colleagues who had relied on Latricia's steady presence now faced the unthinkable. Their friend and coworker had been murdered in the very heart of their workplace. While the hospital was secured, Mario fled. He jumped into a 2011 white Dodge Charger and sped north on the Lodge Freeway. The city was put on high alert as officers tracked his movements. The vehicle was later found abandoned, left as a silent clue of his escape. For hours, Detroit remained tense, unsure of where he was or what he might do next. Families of hospital workers feared for their loved ones. Colleagues gathered in disbelief. The manhunt was on, and the city braced itself for answers. But for Latricia, there would be no second chance. By nightfall, the search had stretched across Detroit. Just after 3 a.m. on August 23rd, less than 18 hours after the shooting, officers located Mario in an East Side neighborhood. The man who had terrorized Latricia for years was finally in custody. But for her family, colleagues, and community, the arrest did not erase the agony of the day before. A mother's life had been taken. A hospital was left grieving. And a city was left asking how this could happen after so many warnings. The echoes of that morning still haunt those who lived through it. Mario Green's capture came less than 18 hours after Latricia's murder. By 3 a.m. on August 23, 2025, Detroit police tracked him down in an East Side neighborhood. The manhunt that had shaken the city ended quietly, without resistance. For authorities, the arrest was swift. For Latricia's family, it was bittersweet justice. The man who had tormented her for years was finally behind bars, but far too late to save her life. The community's relief was laced with grief, knowing her warnings had been ignored until tragedy forced action. Mario's past revealed a troubling pattern. He had a criminal history stretching back decades, including an aggravated stalking conviction in 2001 and an arson case that led to prison time before his release in 2012. To those who knew him, violence was not surprising, it was consistent. What stood out was how quickly the warnings piled up before Latricia's death, yet no effective intervention followed. Now, prosecutors faced a man with a record of intimidation and destruction, standing accused of a crime that shocked not just a family, but an entire city. The charges were severe. Mario faced first-degree premeditated murder, discharging a firearm in a building causing death, aggravated stalking, and possession of a firearm by a prohibited person. On top of these, prosecutors added 4 counts of felony firearm charges. Each charge painted a picture of intent and recklessness, leaving little room for sympathy. Alongside Mario, authorities also charged Anthony Lelamont Barnett, age 54, as an accessory after the fact. Barnett was accused of helping Mario evade capture, though he was released later on bond with strict monitoring and curfew conditions. The case moved swiftly into the courts. On September 4th, 2025, a probable cause hearing was held, where the charges were formally presented. 2 days later, a preliminary examination was scheduled for November 6th at Detroit's 36th District Court. These dates became more than procedural steps, they represented milestones in a pursuit of accountability. For Latricia's family, each appearance was a reminder of the life that had been taken. The legal process now carried the weight of her unheeded pleas, turning them into evidence that would define a courtroom battle and shape Detroit's search for justice. The news of Latricia's death rippled through Detroit with a wave of sorrow. Her family spoke of losing a woman whose kindness had touched countless lives. Her cousin called her magnificent, more than a friend. She was a mother, a wife, she did her job. Coworkers at Henry Ford Hospital, who had leaned on her warmth during difficult shifts, described their grief as unbearable. They remembered her not as a victim, but as someone who offered comfort to others until her final day. For them, the hospital halls now carried an absence that could never be filled. Henry Ford Health issued a statement mourning the loss of one of their own. "We are heartbroken," the message read. "We are providing resources to our team members. The safety and well-being of our patients, visitors, and team members is our greatest priority." Yet grief quickly turned into outrage. The focus shifted to the personal protection order that was granted but never served. To many, Latricia's death was not just about one man's violence. It was about a system that failed to act. Her story became a rallying point for those demanding real change in how threats are handled. The tragedy also exposed a disturbing pattern in Mario's past. An ex-girlfriend recalled how, years earlier, he had stalked her and once held a gun to her head. For advocates, this testimony showed that violence had been part of his history long before Latricia's death. Her murder was not an isolated act. It was the devastating result of repeated warning signs ignored. The community saw in her case a broader truth. Without proper enforcement and accountability, protective orders mean little. Latricia's death became more than one family's loss. It became evidence of a system in urgent need of reform. Latricia's story proves that a piece of paper is not protection if it isn't enforced. She did everything the system asked. She filed reports, documented threats, and secured a court order. Yet, without action, that order was powerless. Her death highlights the urgent need for stronger domestic violence protections, swifter enforcement of restraining orders, and safer workplaces for those living under threat. The failure to act was not only about one man's violence, it was about the cracks in a system that should have shielded her. The questions left behind are unavoidable. What reforms do we need to prevent another Latricia? Should law enforcement be held accountable when protective orders go unserved? How many others are silently waiting for help that never comes? These are not abstract policy issues. They are matters of life and death. Latricia's voice, preserved in her final pleas, demands change. Her case should remind us all that ignoring danger is not an option, and delay can turn warnings into tragedy. Latricia's story is not just about a crime. It's about a system that failed her. She was a mother, a colleague, and a friend whose pleas for help were ignored until it was too late. Her death forces us to confront the gaps that allow violence to thrive unchecked. We cannot change the past, but we can honor her memory by demanding accountability and ensuring her warnings are never forgotten.